Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to Silverstone for the third and final race of the weekend for the Radical European Masters. It's Ben Evans and Josh Duran from Radical Cars with you. And, well, we had plenty of entertainment earlier on. It was Bradley Smith who came through to take the win. And once more, he will start from pole position. And we'll be hoping not to have a safety car this time around.
Yeah, I know, just working around the paddock, speaking to the drivers, there's a lot of people keen to have a clear race, but I think from a spectator point of view, it's been some interesting racing, so we'll see what happens.
Here's how they line up then. Bradley Smith and Man Halals on the front row, then Chris Hyman and Alain Costa row 2, Tony Wells and Mike Cantillon on the third row from John Corbett and Ricardo Dona, then Yanni Herpia and Ollie Hancock, Martin Verity and Konstantin Gugkayev completing the sixth row of the grid. So there's plenty of quick drives at the sharp end of the field. Then Jim Booth and Mark Crader on row 7 from Talal Bin Laden and Richard Carver, Wesley Fonjani and Andrew Ferguson, with Marcello Maratiotto at the back of the grid. And, well, Bradley Smith, he'll be looking to make it 2 wins from 3 races, and certainly with a lot of the gentleman drivers starting this third race, it's an opportunity for Bradley to try and build quite a big buffer early on.
I was going to say, it's very interesting. Obviously, the last race we had the majority of the pros starting. It certainly gives a different dynamic. So with the gentleman drivers starting out in the pairings, it certainly sets a different tone for the race. And yeah, it gives Bradley a good chance to get that lead at the start.
Really does. He'll be looking to build as much of a buffer as possible, not least because he, as a result of that victory, is now going to be hit with 25 success seconds when he does come into the pits, because that's the way that performance is balanced out through the year in the Radical European Masters. If you win the preceding race, you get more success seconds in the pits, and so he does need to build that buffer. There's 20 seconds, though, for Manhals and Alex Capadia, so they're also looking at a fairly lengthy pit stop, and it really does open the door to some of the other drivers and the other combinations to look to challenge.
Yes, so I think Manhal and Alex should be in good points for this race. Manhal's been looking good all weekend, so if he can get a good start and keep as close to Bradley as possible, with that slightly shorter pit stop time, they may be looking for a good result today.
I think Manhal has really benefited this season from sharing the car with Alex Capadia, because without doing Manhal a disservice, certainly when I first started covering Radical racing, which is going back several years ago now, he was on the cusp of being the spare parts department's most loyal customer, but he's just really this year found that consistency with his driving. He has really just started to turn those results around, and it's working fantastically for him. We've got one car that was in trouble at the back of the field. That was Marcello Maratiotto. It's going to start at the back anyway, so he'll hope to catch them up on the formation lap.
Unfortunately, he got going. Yeah, picking up on Manhal, I think Alex has really helped to focus him this year. And yeah, just not having the pressure of the whole race means he can really get down to business. And yeah, I think he's been performing well. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what he'll do in the early stages of this race. And
also, it's just having that reference point in the telemetry of saying, okay, if I do this here and that there, and also that Alex Capadia in particular is a very good example of a driver who goes very, very quickly, but you never feel that he's risking the car. You never feel that he's at the limit. And Manhal has increasingly been matching his racing lines and approach to those of Alex, and it's really rewarding him.
Yeah, and Alex got so many years behind him on the racetrack, and specifically in Radicals, he's worked with a number of customers. So yeah, completely, he's a really good racer, and he's shared a lot of his knowledge with Manhal, and you can just see how that's helped this year.
The cars weaving their way down the hangar straight. It is an hour-long race. Of course, there'll be the pit window between 25 and 35 minutes of the race, and that's when everything can start to become a little bit topsy-turvy, and particularly as the success seconds work their way through. Well, we had a brief shower earlier on, just as the cars were gridding up for the International GT Open race, about an hour and 20 minutes ago now, and thereafter it's remained pretty dark and grey, but it hasn't rained again.
Yeah, the track temperature has dropped as well. You see the guys really working the tyres hard there, and a lot of weaving, just trying to get as much temperature they can in on this lap, which is going to help them. Because yeah, like I said, there's a lot of cloud over, and the temperature has dropped, so we may see rain, but at the moment it's dry. It'll certainly add some excitement to the race if it does, but let's see what happens.
Swinging through Vale and Club, an opportunity to just see if the track conditions have changed. I think the one positive though for the drivers is that the shower that we did have hasn't really washed away the rubber particularly on the track, so the grip levels should be much as they were when they raced about 5 hours ago or so in the first race of the day.
It'd be interesting to see. I know a lot of the drivers this weekend, wind's played a big part of the track. It's sort of the thing you don't see so much on the TV, but you seem to get a lot of wind, especially along Silverstone. It's a very flat circuit, and I think I mentioned earlier into Copse, a lot of the drivers struggling with that tailwind. So I can see, looking outside, it's quite gusty. So we'll see how that weather affects the handling as well.
Well, Silverstone originally was an airfield in World War II that was converted to racing, like so many actually of the World War II airfields, which have become permanent racing venues, and therefore it is in quite an exposed situation on the Northamptonshire-Buckinghamshire border. Always feels like it's blustery at Silverstone, even on a still day. As coming towards the end of the formation lap, then they're going to form up side by side, ready for the rolling start. Interesting, actually, the amount of weaving that's going on. Clearly, there's been a little bit of a drop-off in track temperature. The drivers are trying to get around ahead of the start of the race.
Yeah, you can certainly feel it, and I think they're all too well know they need all that grip off the start lines. The grid's just starting to back up there. In fact, just looking at Manhall's just creeped forward of.
Well, he's got to start playing the mind games, hasn't he? And it will be the responsibility of Bradley Smith to pace the field. But they've got this quite tight section at the end of this formation lap before they bunch up for the rolling start through Luffield. And then we've seen reasonably pragmatic holds on the red light just to make sure all the field are on the start and finish straight before the race gets underway. They're about to go racing for the final time this weekend here at Silverstone in the Radical European Masters as they swing through Woodcote, waiting for the red lights to change, which they do now, and away we go. Sprinting towards Copse for the first time, and Bradley Smith looking to check where Manhall is, but he turns through in the lead with no concerns. Mike Cantillon making good progress already in the orange, white and black Spider. He's tucked up behind Tony Wells. John Corbett also trying to fight his way through, as is Jim Booth. As ever, the Supersport cars all ducking and weaving position behind, but they're all cleanly through the first couple of turns, and as expected, Bradley Smith leads the way from Alice and Chris Hyman.
One to watch is Ollie Hancock in the SR3. They're just in front of Constable. Same as Stewart in the last race. I think you're going to see him really battling with those spiders now.
I think it's Mike Cantillon who's in the car we saw Jamie Constable in earlier in the weekend.
Yes, it is Mike starting, yes.
As Cantillon looks to the inside of Tony Wells. It's got John Corbett tucked up behind him. And Mike, who alongside his Radical commitments also races a historic Formula 1 car, was actually in the Monaco Historic Grand Prix a few weeks ago.
I believe they're here next weekend with the Formula 1, so it's a good run-up for them before the Silverstone Classic.
Well, do feel free to pass my phone number if you need somebody to shake the car down during the week.
I'm sure we'll let them know.
As now Cantillon looks to the inside of Tony Wells, and it's going to be a brave move into Abbey. He's able to scythe past. His next target is Alain Costa. Alain Costa and Johan Scheer have had a fairly wretched weekend. They've effectively retired from both races, and they had the pace in both races to have won them.
Yeah, they're a great pairing, and it was a real shame because obviously Johan really opened out the lead in the last race, but with the technical problems and the penalty, it just didn't work out for them.
Yeah, one of the stories of the earlier races was that track limits were starting to take their toll. Quite a few penalties that had to be served. So in the Supersport class in the early stages, it's Ollie Hancock who leads from Ricardo Dona and Yanni Herpia, as Alain Costa covers the inside line into Brooklands from Mike Cantillon. Cantillon, though, knows where to play to the strengths of the Spider. He knows that Costa can run away through Luffield, but he'll probably have a good chance at chasing him down and challenging into Copse as they come through to complete this first lap of the race. Bradley Smith, his lead over Manhall's already some 2.5 seconds. Third place is Chris Hyman. Fourth is Alain Costa. No, it's not. Fourth is Mike Cantillon, who darts past Costa. Also making good ground is John Corbett, who sides the inside of Tony Wells as they turn into Copse.
Look, Tony was just about to have a little look there, but just a bit too far back, so we'll see how these guys battle on through this section.
Well, the next challenge here for Tony Wells is the progress of, I think is it Andrew Ferguson in the car for this?
I'm not sure which of the brothers is starting this final race.
It's the car that's been shared by Andrew and Jeremy Ferguson. Our grid says Andrew Ferguson, as does our Radical official starting driver sheet. So we'll go
Ferguson's just making a move now. Just pops out on that straight, and he's just got the overall power, so he slides past nicely. Tony will be looking for the cutback, but I think he's probably done enough to cover that off.
And John Corbett now taking his turn to pressurise Alain Costa, but he's not quite close enough to Costa into Vale. But it's interesting, now that the track conditions have just cooled a little bit, the Spider driver's feeling very confident in being aggressive in these early stages, and it suggests they've got the heat into the tyre a little bit quicker than the SR8s and having plenty of fun pushing as Corbett forces the mistake from Alan Costa coming out of club, and he slides to the inside line as they turn into Abbey, and that promotes John Corbett up into 5th place, I think, by the time, yes it is 5th place. Costa slips back. He is now under pressure from Andrew Ferguson as they make their way around the loop.
Yes, certainly. The Spider's a slightly heavier car, and also it's got a much wider footprint, so it just seems to get the tyres heated up a little quicker, and I think that's really helping with these circumstances and the weather conditions now.
As already Cantillon onto terms with Chris Hyman, and this 99 car, we've seen it earlier in the weekend in the hands of Jamie Constable, and it just seems to be absolutely beautifully set up for the circuit. As Mike, he was out in qualifying yesterday and has just jumped in and is immediately very comfortable with the way the car's performing and where he can push to the limit.
Yeah, I mean, Mike's had no testing. He's just put those 3 laps in during the qualifying, and he's stepped straight in and got on it. I know Jamie's done a great job at setting that car up, and again, he didn't have as much testing as a lot of the other drivers, so he's just been on it straight away and really worked getting that car set up for the circuit.
Chris Hyman shuffled back into 4th. Bradley Smith, of course, remains our race leader. Manhal Alos is in 2nd. Mike Cantillon now in 3rd. Chris Hyman to 4th, with John Corbett in 5th. Alan Costa 6th. Andrew Ferguson 7th. Ollie Hancock leads the Supersport class from Ricardo Dona and Yanni Herpier as we are just 5 minutes in. Down the hanger straight for the 3rd time of asking across the Northamptonshire, Buckinghamshire county border, pretty much as they go under the bridge and en route towards Stowe. And the Silverstone circuit, if you've never been here, is unlike several modern circuits which tend to twist back on themselves. It really is a very large layout with Stowe Corner the best part of 1.5 miles away from the pits complex we're using this weekend.
Just looking at the Supersport class here, and they're quite tightly bunched up, so it's going to make very interesting if they stay this tight throughout the duration of this first stint. As soon as the pro drivers hop in, we could see some interesting racing coming.
Oh, and a mistake from Yanni Herpier into Vale. It gives Martin Verity the opportunity to challenge. I've been really impressed with Martin this weekend. He's been quicker with each successive race and is certainly in the hunt for a podium in the Supersport class, if not, in fact, an outright win.
Yeah, Martin's very, very good driver. Again, he's worked his way up, and great to see him here this weekend, out with all these guys. And yeah, let's see how he can do today. He's looking very strong.
Is he going to be able to challenge, though, as they turn into Vale, into Village, rather? The answer is no. They head around the loop, and Ricardo just picks up the throttle. He runs out over the curb. The same for Yanni Herpier. Then we have got Martin Verity just behind. Meanwhile, Jim Booth has got Ollie Hancock snapping at his heels. And in fact, that's been a change of position on this lap. Jim Booth up into 9th. Ollie Hancock drops down into 10th. Ollie trying to give Mark Hignett as big a buffer as possible to take into the second half of the race. Because what we've not seen in either race this weekend is because of the safety cars, because of the timing of the safety cars, some of the strategies and some of the Pro-Am approaches haven't really played out in full.
No, yeah, it's Jim Booth just running wide there.
Not quite as wide as Ollie Hancock.
Follows him off. He's obviously watching his line. But yeah, I think it's very hard with the safety cars to plan out strategy, and obviously there's a clear way to make the car work, especially when you've got a pro driver. You want them on track as much as possible. So in terms of overall field, it's helped having the safety cars, but if we have a clear race here, we're going to see some very different strategies and results.
I think we will, and that's going to be certainly something to watch for in the second half of the race, because what we've not really seen this weekend is the full potential of James Littlejohn when he gets in the car from Tony Wells. We've not actually seen the whole race pace for Bradley Smith, our race leader. Here he is in the MechTech Run Spider. Understand that he's taken the car in a setup direction that really suits his style of driving this weekend, and has found it's been very effective for him. A little bit of a seesaw at the wheel through the loop. That's not particularly surprising, as he then kicks on through Aintree and down the Wellington Straight.
Yeah, again, just looking at Bradley's driving very smooth. He looks very comfortable in the car, and I think it's shown with the results from the weekend. You know, he's just performed very consistently, so he should be a really good race for him.
His lead over Manhalos last time around was 5.8 seconds. Oh no, Alain Costa, more problems for Alain, and it has been the most unfortunate luck this weekend in a season where he has had the most unfortunate luck as well. Every single race this year, Alain Costa and Johan Scheer have had the pace to win it, and sadly, on too many occasions, luck has just really gone against them.
You couldn't write it for these guys. They've had such a tough time, and real shame to see them pulling off there, because they really, really had a good chance for this race. So be interesting to find out what's gone wrong there.
Kind of want to just buy them a lottery ticket out of consolation, really, as the race leader Bradley Smith negotiates the Beckett's complex, swings out a Chapel curve down the Hanger straight, and what you don't quite get a sense of from that camera angle is just how long this straight is, with then Alos 7.6 seconds adrift of Bradley, and Mike Cantillon actually beginning to close in onto the tail of Manhal Alos. He was 9/10 quicker last time around, and Mike just using every inch of the road in the Spider. He knows where Manhal Alos is. He can see that he's catching him. He was 4 seconds back at the start of the lap. Might be a little bit closer at the end of it.
I think a number of the drivers, after a lot of warnings of track limits as the last racing, so they're being slightly more conservative and just using slightly less. I say that as Manhal runs slightly wide.
Can only think that the race director has threatened the use of stingers on the edge of the curbs, as I think it's also, once you start dishing out penalties, that's when drivers learn the lesson, because it's when the race starts to get ruined for them. And in particular, Mike Cantillon giving us a great example of how you can be devastatingly effective staying well within the white lines.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic driving from Mike. Again, just seems to make the car look very smooth and easy to drive, and he really is keeping up with the back of Manhal Alos there, which is good for him but not so good for Manhal, who really needs to be pulling as much of a lead as he can. Down
the Wellington Straight and through Brooklands for Bradley Smith, and a problem there for Andrew Ferguson. He's had a little bit of a spin at Village. He is back up to speed though fairly quickly. We just heard the squeal of tyres in the ambient track as Manhal Alos. Then this lap for Manhal is a 2 minutes 4.8 versus a 2 minutes 3.8 for Mike Cantillon, so he takes a full second out of Manhal Alos.
Yeah, he certainly is catching. Interesting to see this gap. It's still enough, but yeah, Mike's obviously got his eyes firmly set on catching that place up pre-pit stop.
And why not? He certainly will know that once Manhal hands over to Alex Capadia, the job gets a little bit tougher in the second half of the race. And Mike, almost John Alesi-esque in moving his head in the direction of the circuit. And if you ever watch the videos of John Alesi, the former Ferrari F1 driver, he always used to move his head to lean into the corners, almost in the style of a motorbike racer. And Mike's certainly leaning in on that occasion.
It's funny, Mike and Jamie both seem to have a very similar driving style. I don't know whether it's from their time with the F1 cars, whether they have developed that certain unique style, but yeah, both driving the car very similar to watch.
I think if you've got Formula One experience, and I'm absolutely not speaking from a point of knowledge here because I don't have any, I think that those are such awesome machines, those historic Formula One cars, that they race alongside their commitments in the Radical European Masters, that you learn to really respect cars with an abundance of power relative to the grip, and it translates in your ability to make more contemporary machinery work really well.
Yeah, and again, lots of similarities. This car's got a lot of downforce, a lot of power, and obviously the turbo-powered Ford V6 engine. And the Formula One cars, again, they're very high in aerodynamics and they have a lot of horsepower. So, although very different cars and series, a lot of similarities for these guys, and I think that's why they love coming and doing the Radical series. It gives them great training for getting out and doing the F1 races.
Yeah, what you don't really get a sense of until you see the cars up close, I was watching at Cops earlier on today, is just how ferociously quick the Masters class cars are, and indeed the Super Sport class cars as well, because the Radical Racing Ladder offers drivers who potentially coming into the sport with no prior experience the opportunity to move up through the rungs and race really very, very potent machinery at a cost level that is well below what you might find with some other classes of racing.
It certainly is, and again, going back to the Spider, it's the closest really you can get to driving in a prototype Le Mans car, and the similar sort of speed and feeling, but at a fraction of the cost. So it really does give these guys a glimpse of the higher series and the big machinery.
And it just gives you the chance to enjoy some very, very quick cars as well. Now here is Chris Hyman. He is in fourth, and under no particular pressure from John Corbett just at the moment, as can see just how much of a gap Mike Cantillon has been able to pull out, something in the region of 7.5 seconds over Chris Hyman, but Chris knows that he has got the very quick Darren Burke to take over from him through the second phase of the race. They have, however, got some 15 seconds of success seconds to overcome, so that's going to be something for them to consider as well.
It's been great seeing Darren in the car with Chris, just seeing how he's got on that. Obviously Chris has raced with Alex Mortimer over the previous years, who's in with Mark Crader today, so great to see him with someone else, and they seem to be getting on really well, and as a pairing, very quick, very competitive.
I remember seeing Darren Burke at the Formula Ford Festival going back a few years ago, and nobody really knew who he was, and he just got in the car and was suddenly right at the very front of the field, and that's what you're looking for. And it's nice to see a driver like Darren, who I know has never been the best funded, to get an opportunity like this to show his ability in a televised series, an international series, and alongside somebody with the experience of Chris.
Yes, great. It's a great platform, both for the gentlemen and professional drivers. They love it, and it's a great atmosphere with some really good drivers. And yeah, over the years we've had so many people coming, and just a lovely series to be part of.
Now Chris is coming to the end of his 7th lap. We're 10 minutes away from the pit window opening. We'd be expecting to see Chris Hyman as one of the first cars to duck into the pits in the Supersport class, by the way. It's still Ollie Hancock from Riccardo Dona and Yanni Herpia, with Marcello Maracciotto now up ahead of Martin Verity. We've got somebody else in trouble for track limits, and that is Talal Bin Laden. He has been given the black and white flag. Now, the Bin Laden's got a stop-and-go penalty for track limits in the earlier race.
Yeah, certainly need to watch that. It does seem, just watching a couple of the drivers getting a little bit more confident on the cornering, and everyone's going to have to really watch those track limits so they don't get the penalties as earlier.
You've just got to cut your cloth accordingly to a certain extent, and recognise that you do risk penalisation. At the same time, it is very tempting, and it's also quite tricky, I think, sometimes if you're a trackside observer, to make the distinction between a driver who's using those limits as almost an escape valve because they've made a slight mistake, versus those who are doing it because they think they can sneak another couple of hundredths of a second.
Yeah, very difficult. Most drivers just innocent mistake, and the trouble is when you're pushing, especially focused on the car in front, it's so difficult knowing exactly where on the track, and those white lines, it's such a fine line between using all of the circuit and going over. So very difficult to manage, but the guys know exactly what they need to be doing.
Manhal Alos has re-extended his advantage over Mike Cantillon, just a slight elevation in pace from Manhal. It means that he is coming back towards Bradley Smith. At one point, Bradley was long gone. It's now a gap of some 4.4 seconds as Bradley lapping in the 2-minute 4-second bracket. But again, I'd suspect that is Bradley playing the long game, knowing he's going to need to ask a bit more of the tyres later on when some more of the pro drivers are in the car, and so driving at a pace that's allowing him to maintain his lead, not being particularly concerned about Alos catching and passing him before the pit window, but at the same time also leaving something in reserve for later on.
Yeah, Bradley's got to be careful here. Obviously, you're completely right, getting those tyres saved and make sure he doesn't overcut them before the second stint. But as we know, Alex is very keen to get out and show performance, and he's a very quick driver. So as much as possible, Bradley needs to just keep that gap up to give himself as much chance as he can in this second stint. Mike
Cantillon secure in third, all the while easing clear of Chris Hyman. The gap to Manhal is now a little bit more static than it had been, as I just love the way that Mike leans his head through Beckett's.
Yeah, great view there with his clear visor on as well. You can really see his focused face there, and yeah, as you say, using his head and really getting into that car.
And the concentration as well from Mike Cantillon. Looking ahead there, you can see he's looking well ahead through the corner, just waiting to pick his perfect line. Again, the illustration from Bradley Smith, looking to the exit of the club before he's even turned into it.
Yeah, all these drivers spend a lot of time away from the circuit, lots of them doing simulators and looking over their videos, and the sort of side you don't see on the TV is them sitting down reviewing data, looking at their laps. A lot of these guys very, very keen on looking at that, and these guys are always looking for that extra bit of speed and how they can improve their driving.
It's one of those series where you do get a lot of technically minded drivers coming into the championship who are really keen in getting into that side of the sport, and it's always very interesting. In some championships, after the practice session, you'll go to the awnings and everybody's basically in the hospitality tent. With Radical, everybody's sitting over the laptops is trying to find that extra tenth, that extra hundredth somewhere out on the track.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the guys racing in this series are very successful businessmen. They're very used to analysing information and data and wanting to know all the information they can to get the best out of something, and it's no different to their racing. They take it very seriously and spend a lot of time reviewing that, and yeah, it certainly is a really good atmosphere for that reason.
Tony Wells in 6th position. You can see John Corbett up there ahead of him. It's going to be quite a task here for James Littlejohn when he takes over the car, because Tony is the best part of 25 seconds off the lead of the race. And they've just had a slightly muted weekend. I'm not sure that maybe all is quite as they'd hope it was with the car, as now Manhal really coming onto terms now with Bradley Smith. And, well, yesterday we saw Bradley letting Alex Capadia get away from him. Not sure he'll be quite so keen to allow Manhal past him. And that was another very slow lap from Bradley. And for all that we're saying Bradley's trying to run to a lap time, a 2 minutes 5.5 is not what he'd be looking for.
No, he certainly has slowed down the pace slightly. I'm just wondering exactly why the issue, if there's an underlying technical issue, whether he's looking at just saving those tyres. But he's got to be very careful now, because Manhal's got some good pace and it really has closed that gap down.
Into Vale for Bradley Smith as Alos closes up on the brakes. And this is the difficulty for Manhal. Of course, it's one thing to catch Bradley Smith, but as long as Bradley gets his exits onto the straights, then there's not going to be an awful lot the Manhals can do. That said, the Spider not really breaking clear, in fact, the SR8 at all, as they head towards Abbey. And Alos is lining up the move here for the lead of the race on Bradley Smith. Bradley doing everything he can as to the inside darts Manhal Alos, and Alos snatches lead the race from Bradley Smith. And now this is the opportunity for Alos to try and break away, build a little bit of a buffer before the pit window opens. It certainly also answers the question about whether or not Bradley is nursing a little bit of a problem.
Yeah, certainly it's a great move by Alos, as we just see back here again. He comes down the inside. Bradley takes a slightly wider line in order to try and get a better drive out the corner, but the pace of the SR8 just pulls away, and by that time the deal's done.
Down Wellington Straight, Bradley able to close back onto terms with Manhal Alos, but the SR8s are quite something. You just put your foot down and they absolutely rocket away. But then as the turbo kicks in the Spider, that is also a car to contend with on the straights. And Alos driving out of his skin at the moment to make sure that he keeps Bradley Smith behind him. Maximum commitment through Copse Corner.
So yeah, Bradley's going to be looking to hold on as much as he can there, but Manhal just having a slight pull away there and just creating that gap, which will be making Alex Capadia smile, I'm sure.
I mean, what's making me a little bit anxious for the well-being of Bradley's car is that Mike Cantillon, in the very similar Spider, is currently 2.5 seconds a lap quicker, and is consistently lapping in the low 2 minute 3 second bracket, which is more or less what Manhal was doing, and that's why Mike Cantillon is emerging in the back of the picture, slowly catching this leading duo.
Yeah, I think it's certain with those lap times, looking at that there must be an issue with Bradley's car. So hopefully with the pit window coming up in not too long, he may be able to just keep the car going and keep as close to Manhal as possible to reduce the damage, and it may be something they can look at sorting during that pit window.
Meanwhile, in the Supersport class, that remains Ollie Hancock from Ricardo Dona and Yanni Herpia, the top three, ahead of Marcello Maritiotto and Martin Verity. The race order is Manhal's leads from Bradley Smith, then Mike Cantillon, Chris Hyman is fourth, John Corbett, Tony Wells, Andrew Ferguson and Jim Booth.
Yeah, the guys in the Supersport have really kept those gaps quite tight, so it's going to be very interesting after the pit window to see where they all come out and what the pro drivers can do in that class, mixed in with the gentleman drivers out there.
Yeah, well, when Stuart Mosley takes over from Ricardo Dona, he's got 30 success seconds to try and drive around, which is known as quite a lot. And there are going to be others with similar challenges. Konstantin Gudkayev has got 20 success seconds. He is completing the race single-handedly. Ivan Lukasevich, I expect, has probably had to leave to get an aeroplane. So Gudkayev doing the whole 60 minutes on his own. He's currently in 16th, just behind Talal Bin Laden. The pit window will open when there are 35 minutes left on the clock, but of course, to explain once more, they can only pit in once they've gone past the pit lane open board, and at the current pace, what that means is that everybody from fourth place onwards, I think, is going to be able to pit a lap sooner than the leading trio.
Yeah, certainly. It's an interesting way of doing it. It does create slight extra element to looking at the strategy, because you can't predict exactly when the board's going to go and who's going to see it. So it's interesting to see, but the guys will be already planning when they're going to bring their drivers in and how they're going to do the changes.
Well, I'd imagine we'll see Bradley Smith probably coming in right at the outside of the pit window just to get the car checked over. For Mike Cantillon and Matt Halls, they're absolutely locked into a groove. There's no need to bring them in any earlier than you need to. Meanwhile, Chris Hyman has just set his personal best lap of the race and is picking up the pace too in fourth. That means that he is now a good 6 seconds clear of John Corbett. Bradley seesawing at the wheel through club, and that is most unlike Bradley's driving style. It's not what you want to be doing as a driver, that many corrections of the wheel.
No, we've seen all weekend Bradley's been so smooth in the car and looking very comfortable and happy. So it's very interesting to see. He's definitely battling with that car, so I wonder if he's got an issue with the tyre or something in the suspension. It'd be interesting to see what they find at the pit stop and if we see them making any tyre changes, for example.
Yeah, just wonder if they went somewhere with the stiffness or softness of the car to reflect the track was a little bit cooler, and they may have just gone a little bit too far with it.
Yeah, they may well have been looking to do that as the weather changed. So yeah, certainly you can see him there just battling, and the car looks slightly more twitchy. He's not quite got that smooth rhythm he had earlier.
Yeah, it feels like he's fighting the car a little bit more than he'd want to. And Alos, however, has got his car working exactly as he would like.
Yeah, man, are looking very comfortable up front.
Just so many corrections to the wheel for Bradley Smith. It suggests that whatever they've done to change the car between the previous race and this one, it's possibly not quite worked out. But again, it's his first weekend in the car. It's all about the learning process. Mike Cantillon, well, his initial charge has just been thwarted slightly. His pace dropping on that last lap to a 2 minutes 4.9, and that means that having previously been chasing down Bradley Smith, he's no longer doing that, as the pit window is now open for 10 minutes. So from 35 minutes left in the race, 25 minutes left in the race. However, in reality, it's from about 33 minutes to 23 minutes, because as long as they don't go past the pit lane closed board, then they can make their pit stop even if it's slightly outside the time bubble. So I'd imagine we'll see the likes of Riccardo Dona and Marcello Marattiotto coming in right at the outside of this pit window, as meanwhile Jim Booth and Ollie Hancock continue to dispute 8th and 9th position. It was momentarily in favour of Ollie. I suspect that will have been reversed by the time they got to Brooklands.
Yep, Jim with the turbo V6 powered Spider will have hopefully shot back, I'd imagine, with all that power there. But I think, yeah, we're going to see a lot of guys diving in the pits fairly soon.
I'm not sure that Wesley Fonagini saw that Bradley Smith was looking to lap him then, but he's been able to dart through nonetheless. It's always the challenge as you get in and amongst the traffic. We've got a drive-through penalty for car number 8, Talal Bin Laden. It's the second drive-through penalty, unfortunately for track limits, that car has incurred today.
Yeah, these guys had a bit of a tough weekend with penalties, obviously struggling with keeping that car in the white lines.
It happens, and also sometimes you just don't see that warning board if you've got so many other things to concentrate on.
No, it certainly is difficult when you're focused. I know these guys are new to racing in this series, and it's a new car to them, so they're putting all their focus they can into the racecraft and doing as well as they can. It's difficult for them to be spotting those boards, but something that they'll probably take away from this meeting is just learning really to be looking out for those, and that the penalties do kill the results. So.
That said, I think both of them, Talal and Faisal Bin Laden, have been very impressive since they came into the championship from Spa onwards. They've really got to grips with that car, and they're learning the circuits as they go. Yeah,
doing fantastic, and they're being coached by Michael Verges, who obviously know very well. He's driven Radicals for a number of years and been associated with the company as well as other series. So they've got a great guy there coaching them, and they seem to be really coming along. So interesting to see what they do for the rest of the year, but certainly their results are getting better and better.
I remember seeing Michael Verges in the first of the Radicals when it appeared in the Castle Combe Special GT race, and watching him wring the neck of that car was an absolute treat. The first of the pit stops is underway. Darren Burke shakes hands with Chris Hyman, gets ready to jump in. Also in his Tony Wells, hand over to James Littlejohn. No surprise that they are getting their pit stops done and dusted early on in this pit window.
Tony just having a quick chat to James there. I expect he's just letting him know about the car and the track conditions.
Saying what to watch and where, and where the grip is. And it's amazing actually how much information the drivers can debrief during those 1 or 2 sentences during the pit changeover. Also in is Ricardo Donut, hand over to Stuart Mosley, and the SR3s don't need to refuel, so that is going to be a very short and sharp driver change. Mosley in one side, Donor out the other side. That's the benefit of having a passenger seat space.
Interesting, they've decided to keep Alice out for a little longer. Obviously feel that he's putting in good times and getting the groove.
Well, I think it was also because he didn't quite get the pit open board. He'd just gone through to
Just
start
slightly
a lap.
ahead, so he's a lap behind, yeah.
So it will be, I think this is the end of the first lap in which he'll be able to come into the pits. Meanwhile, Martin Verity is in. Also in has come Mark Crader. It's hand over to Alex Mortimer. And, well, Manhal is into the pit lane. So here comes Manhal, also in is Bradley Smith. So they're taking the opportunity to get their pit stops away at the first possible opportunity under the scrutiny of long-time Radical journalist Pete Scherer, who was watching everything from Woodcote.
Interesting to see if they'll put the camera onto Bradley Smith's car here, see if we can see anything that might be up the car.
Meanwhile, Alex Mortimer gets strapped into the 62 car that he's taken over from Mark Craig. Now here we go. We're not going to see anything first of all. The first point of business is to get the fuel into the car. And whatever has been the issue, as that wasn't too much fuel going in, Bradley gets in now. So it didn't seem as if there was any urgency to do some work on the car.
But I think you're right, they must have been looking at doing some setup changes between sessions and maybe just not quite got the car right, because they don't seem to be panicking over anything that's failed or gone wrong there. So maybe just a slight misjudgment on the setup with the weather conditions changing.
Also into the pits is John Corbett. Now, is he going to let James Winslow out for a play? Looks like it, so this is going to be fun.
Certainly, this is going to be really interesting. Obviously, James Winslow, fantastic driver, really experienced in sort of prototyping sports cars. Obviously, he works with John Corbett coaching him, so see him in the car this weekend, that's going to be really good, and see what he can do at the front of that pack.
He's going to have 30 minutes to play with, as we've got another drive-through penalty, and this time for Wesley Fongeny.
I think we saw Wesley go off a couple of times there, so they've obviously just picked up on that and decided that he's penalised for that. Little John just out in the car now, looking very comfortable.
Yeah, James Little John, actually another historic Formula 1 racer alongside his Radical commitments. Oh, we're not sure that Konstantin Gudkayev saw him then, and Little John was determined to go for that move, which he was able to execute, heading into Brooklands, then around Luffield. And Gudkayev now ducks in to make his pit stop. Little John has got the best part of 29 minutes to play with, and this is the point of the race where everything is a little bit in flux, because we don't quite know how the order's going to shake out post pit stops.
It's certainly interesting to see. Obviously, we've got a number of mix-ups with the succession seconds in the pit lane, so it does take a couple of laps just to work out exactly where everyone is on the track.
Certainly does, as team wave Gudkayev to a halt, and Konstantin comes to a stop. Just a little bit of work to check the tyre pressure, see how the tyres have warmed up or not with the slightly lower track temperatures, as here is Alex Kapadia. Kapadia, having taken over from Manhal Alos, the question is going to be really where he is in relation to Bradley Smith, and also where he is in relation to Mike Cantillon once Mike has been into the pits. But for now, Mike Cantillon hasn't had his pit stop. Also very much looking forward to the progress of James Winslow. And Kapadia was in the pits for an additional 20 seconds beyond what the minimum pit stop time could have been, and so that is going to be another.
I think it's the first time this season we've seen Manau hand the car over in pole position on the circuit, so for Alex that's really great news, and he's got those 20 seconds to build up on, but he should have some fantastic pace. He's got a clear track, so you really should see a good result there.
And there's Darren Burke just behind him, so Darren Burke looking to try and chase down Alex Kapadia. This could be a lot of fun in a weekend that maybe hasn't gone quite according to plan for Tony Wells and James Littlejohn. More opportunity for Alos and Kapadia to take some points off them. And Herpia getting his pit stop out of the way as well. So we're down to just a very select few who haven't come into the pits, which slightly unusually includes Marcello Maracciotto. I really thought he would come in right at the top of the window to hand over to Marco Cencetti.
Yeah, it's very unusual that he stayed out. Must be in the groove and enjoying himself.
I think it's also they've got 20 success seconds, and maybe they figure then that they were unlikely to get on the podium anyway, so give Marcello a few more laps behind the wheel.
Quite possibly, yeah. I'm looking forward to seeing what Darren Burks can do. We've obviously seen hints of his pace all weekend, but with the safety cars in and out, it's been hard to see exactly what that is. So now, with a good sort of 25 minutes left, it's going to be interesting to see just how he catches up with Alex Kapadia in their racecraft.
Well, his deficit to Kapadia at the end of the last lap was 5.9 seconds. Kapadia on the out lap, so hard to make a judgment on outright pace.
So I'm just coming around the background, he's within sight.
So from here, Silverstone this weekend, next stop of the Road to Grand Masters, memory serves correctly, is Donington Park in mid-August, and then on to Monza in October after that.
Yeah, correct. It's sort of, I think it's the first year, or certainly in a long time, we've done 2 UK rounds, but all our drivers love Silverstone, love Donington, so decided to put both on the calendar this year. Donington's a fantastic track for the radicals, lots of elevation, bit of a tighter circuit, so the guys absolutely love it. And then on to Monza, very high-speed track. We were there last year, so that'll be really interesting with the Spiders and the SR8s again.
And also with a lot of European motorsport shutting down during August, it's nice to be able to organise an event for the drivers who'll have their racing fingers twitching.
Yeah, certainly the last couple of years, August has been 4 or 5 week period of no racing with the companies in Europe shutting down, and especially the motorsport industry. So yeah, it just keeps the guys busy and on hand. They love being out in the cars every 2 or 3 weeks.
And why not? They're such great fun. Now, Alex Kapadia has just set the fastest middle sector of the race so far, which suggests that he is getting up to speed very nicely. Now, Bradley Smith is out on track behind both Kapadia and Burke, and he is 3.2 seconds behind Darren Burke, so it's going to be a little bit of a challenge here for Bradley Smith. The driver change window has closed. Marco Cincetti about to jump in from Marcello Maritiotto. The race leader, Mike Cantillon, still not into the pits, but Cantillon at the current pace of Kapadia is giving away the best part of 4 seconds a lap to Alex. So once the pit stops are done and dusted, it should be, it's going to be close actually, because Cantillon doesn't have any success seconds to contend with, so it's going to be quite close as to whether or not it's Kapadia or Cantillon who emerges in the lead of the race. Certainly it's looking very good for Alex Kapadia for the race victory.
The main thing is these guys, obviously with the pit stops, the traffic mixes up a bit, so they've just got to try and get past the slower cars in the traffic to make sure they're not losing any time, because every second, every 10 is going to count here.
Kapadia picks his way around Konstantin Gurkaev, and Gurkaev just sticking to the racing line, making that very transactional for Kapadia, which is exactly what he would have wanted. And then navigates Village into the loop through the right-hander and then on to Aintree. Just a little bit of a wobble, a much bigger wobble for Konstantin Gurkaev.
Yeah, both cars running slightly wide, but yeah, Konstantin just getting a little bit wide there, losing it.
And actually, in the 4 or 5 years of racing since that section of the circuit was introduced, it always seems to be quite a challenge for the drivers. They just struggle to get, if you get the breaking point for Village wrong, it can really mess up the whole sequence.
Yeah, and these guys, they all know the circuit well. They spend a lot of time at Silverstone, the majority of the guys out there, but always a challenging circuit, and they're always learning more each time they come.
And it's a track which, particularly in the Masters class cars, the lap is so quick. We're on near parity here with the GT3 cars, a little bit slower than some contemporary single-seaters, but nonetheless, very, very competitive lap times when you compare it, certainly to other categories of racing within this price envelope, and makes it a very busy lap. It's a circuit that really rewards high-powered and fast machinery with the big, long straights and the high-speed changes of direction.
Yeah, and worth noting, there's a lot of high-speed corners and they're putting a lot of G-force, so especially the guys that are doing this whole hour on their own, it's a very tiring race, and with the heat we've seen the last couple of days, particularly difficult. So the fitness of these drivers is actually, they've got to really work out in the weeks and keep fitness up in order to be competitive for the whole hour race.
Into the pits comes Mike Cantillon, and given how much time is left on the clock, I'm wondering if that's touch and go, whether he's actually a lap late for the pit window.
Yeah, obviously we saw the pit lane close, so it's whether he's just managed to get in or...
Add 2 minutes and 5 seconds to that, and that's 24 minutes and a quarter, so...
He may have cut it just a little bit fine. So obviously hops out the car so the guys can refuel.
And that would be a real shame for Mike if he does get penalised for pitting outside the window. We'll find out in due course. Alex Kapadia looking very likely to take over lead of the race, because as Cantillon's car is being topped up with fuel, Kapadia navigating the loop. His next target is Faisal bin Laden to put a lap on the Supersport class car. Post pit stops, by the way, of the Supersport runners, it's Stuart Mosley who leads from Mark Hignett and Yanni Herpier, with then Marco Cincetti chasing Yanni down as well as we head towards the final third of the race. And this is the purest of the races so far for the Radical European Masters this weekend. The other two are a little bit interrupted by safety cars and other distractions. This one is letting the strategies play out, at least for now. We'll find out in a moment's time as Kapadia comes through Copse Corner whether or not Mike Cantillon's going to emerge in the lead of the race, or whether it's going to be Kapadia. The answer is it's almost certainly going to be Kapadia, because Cantillon only now is registering as leaving the pit lane, and that means through the long shot that he will be some way behind Kapadia. Meanwhile, a little bit of a wobble again for Gudkayev. That just gives a moment of pause for Littlejohn, and yes, a stop and go penalty for Mike Cantillon for pitting after the pit window had closed. Thought it might have been the case. It just seemed as if he did go a lap too far, and that's a great shame for Mike. It removes what would have almost certainly been a podium for him.
Yeah, real shame for Mike. As we said earlier, such a fine line and getting in there last minute without getting penalised for missing the board. So real shame for him, and that is going to impact his race and drop him back a little bit there.
Shows just how much of a groove though he'd hooked up into. Makes life a lot easier for Alex Kapadia. Kapadia 7.5 seconds up the road from Darren Burke and pulling clear of Darren. Darren Burke likewise moving away from Bradley Smith in what's going to be third place once Mike Cantillon's had his stop and go penalty. But Bradley is being caught by James Littlejohn, so that's the battle that's most likely to come together. The one between the 91 car of Bradley Smith, the number 2 car of James Littlejohn. This is just very nice for Kapadia. This is exactly what he would have wanted, which is to be out on his own at the front of the field. And now he doesn't need to put any more stress on the car than he absolutely has to. He's got a comfortable buffer that he can manage. He's got a big buffer over Darren Burke. There you see Burke at the very back of your picture in pursuit of Cantillon. Then we've got Bradley Smith as Cantillon darts to the inside of Faisal bin Laden. That's to put the lap on him, but he's going to come to the end of this lap and see the disappointing news hanging out over the pit wall, which is that he has got that stop and go penalty.
Yeah, real shame, because Mike is looking really comfortable in that car. He's still driving very well, so real shame he's got to come through with that, because that would have been really interesting to see how that unfolded.
And there you see the sign being hung out to say the stop and go for car 99, Mike Cantillon. So although for the moment he is in second place, and effectively it's a slightly phony second place, unless Darren Burke gets given a stop and go penalty as well. As through Beckett's just a little bit offline there for Mike Cantillon. This is the opening for Darren Burke, although Cantillon recovers very nicely, gets the car hooked up for the closing segment of Beckett's. It also means that he has got the line coming out of Chapel Curve and consults his mirrors, sees where Darren Burke is, sees that the red car is getting a little bit smaller in his mirrors, and therefore can just pull away.
Yeah, Darren really catching up on that tighter section, but as soon as they open up on that straight, Power of the Spider just pulls away. But they're going to keep very close to the next couple of laps, so Mike's got to just make sure he keeps the car in the straight and narrow. But obviously, because he's got this drive-through, he is going to fall back soon anyway.
Now, Bradley Smith and James Littlejohn, that gap is at 2 seconds or thereabouts. Littlejohn is closing in, but he might struggle to pass Bradley Smith, because Bradley has been able to elevate his pace post pit stops to run in the low 2-minute 2-second bracket, which is what he'll need to maintain if he wants to get onto the podium. Cantillon swoops into Village, into the loop. That was a half opening for Darren Burke, but I expect Darren would have probably been told on the radio that Mike needs to serve a stop-go and penalty, and therefore only to go for the pass, and if it's pretty much cast iron guarantee he's going to get through.
Yep, very close to the back of him. Just looking at opportunities, just slightly much smoke gap, and with the power of that Spider just pulling away on the straight sections, he's finding it difficult.
And one of the things that Mike is doing very well, always he shuts the door a little bit late on Darren Burke then, is that even the shortest straights, he's just able to squirt that car, build that little bit of a buffer over Darren Burke. So the run from Brooklands to Luffield, he just seemed to get a tiny bit of love from the turbo. It gave him that half a car length, and that was just all he needed.
Yeah, certainly. Great attempt there for Darren, just looking at that space. You can see he's looking for every single gap on the corners there and really working the car. So I'm sure we're going to see another move shortly.
And again, running offline on the way into Beckett's, but it works for him. But not on this occasion, because Darren Burke sees a gap to the inside line, is able to capitalise as they swing out of Beckett's and onto the hanger straight now. Can Mike Cantillon get the power down in the Spider and look to challenge? Darren Burke gives him a little bit of a wave and sort of says, well, fair enough, but he's going to have to do it all over again. But this is the beauty of racing, where you've got lots of different models in the race, because they've all got strengths and weaknesses around different parts of the circuit.
Yeah, you see it, Darren just kept putting the pressure on Mike. He made that small mistake, and then he could just go around the outside and then finish it off just on the inside that corner. But Mike, with a fantastic run out there and the power, just managed to take it back off him. So fantastic for us to watch.
Really is. And Bradley Smith is actually closing onto their tail as well. He's bringing James Littlejohn with him for company. And so the frustration here for Darren Burke is that at the moment of this four-car fight disputing second place, Mike Cantillon is currently the slowest of the quartet, and it's allowing everybody else to close onto his tail. Oh, that's smart from Darren Burke. He was looking for that wide line to see if he could just play it into the inside line for the loop. But Cantillon is using the girth of the Spider's good effect, and Darren Burke now looks to sneak to the inside at Aintree. And Cantillon will say, OK, well, fair enough. But here comes Bradley Smith, and Bradley is about to ruin Darren Burke's day, because he's going to power past by the time they arrive into Brooklands. Darren Burke wants to fight it on the brakes. Bradley tries to shut the door and holds the traction to the outside line. They give each other racing room just, and it gave Bradley Smith the inside line for Luffield. Darren Burke, though, able to restate the line into Luffield, as now Mike Cantillon comes across and takes his drive-through penalty. Bradley Smith's going to look to try and push his way past en route to Copse. Darren Burke sees him coming, and Bradley really wants this, and he goes up into second place. Runs out of road. Darren Burke reclaims the position.
We're going to see Little John catching up these two now as they battle. That's going to give him a great opportunity. So we could see fantastic battle from these three cars over the next couple of laps.
As they work through Beckett's. I don't think that Bradley's going to be quite close enough to Darren Burke as they come out of Chapel Curve to make this move along the hanger straight. But maybe it's just been the change in wind direction, but the potency of the Spider in a straight line is really being shown to very, very good effect, as through Stowe, and again Burke has got the advantage. James Littlejohn lurking there in fourth place. Wesley Fongenay, I am sad to report, has just picked up his second stop-and-go penalty for track limits, which it's all about the learning experience. I know that this is his first race in Radicals for a little while, and is, not unsurprisingly, just taking a little bit of time to adapt, or readapt rather, and reacquaint himself with the characteristics of the car.
Yeah, Wesley Fontini, very experienced driver, and he's done lots of Radicals previous. He's had a couple of years out with the Radicals specifically, and yeah, really enjoying being back in the car. But it does take a while to get back on it, and you know, there's a good bunch of guys out there racing, so it does make it difficult to try and learn the car and pick up the tracks again. But good weekend from him. Just a few mistakes that he could do with eliminating, and he might see some slightly better results.
Well, hopefully he will be back on the grid in a few weeks' time for Donington Park, and we'll be able to see him in action again once more there, as the battle that's going to come together is this one for third and fourth as we head towards the last stage of the race, which is going to be a case of whether or not Bradley Smith is going to be able to keep James Littlejohn behind him, as we are into the final 12.5 minutes or so of the race. Alex Kapadia is the race leader. Second place Darren Burke, third place Bradley Smith, fourth is James Littlejohn, fifth Mike Cantillon. In sixth place, it's Andrew Ferguson. Seventh, Stuart Mosley. Eighth, Marco Cenchetti. And ninth, Jenny Herpia, with Mosley, Cenchetti and Herpia, your Super Sport class podium as well. Out of Chapel Curve, down the hanger straight once more. This is the 23rd lap of the race, and Bradley Smith able to use and play to the strength of the Spider here to open up some daylight over James Littlejohn, start to show himself in Darren Burke's mirrors. And this is going to be a little bit of a yo-yo battle, really, with the Spider bouncing between the two SR8s.
Yeah, certainly looked like Darren had pulled a bit of a gap a minute ago, but now Bradley right up closing that gap again. So going to be really interesting to see who makes the next move and how this plays out.
And they are all racing for position. They're all racing for the podium, and so there's going to be no quarter given here. Darren is entitled to defend as hard as he can within the rules of the competition from Bradley Smith. Likewise, Bradley is perfect within his rights if he's able to find a way past Darren on one of the straights to do that. No matter how frustrating it might be, you've got another stop and go penalty, and that is for, now that's a very significant stop and go penalty. It is for Stuart Mosley, the Supersport class leader, and that is for having too short a pit stop.
Yeah, very unusual. We don't often see that, especially in a team like that with the stewards. So that's going to be very difficult for them to swallow, and they'll have to come and pay that very shortly.
And unfortunately, we are now deep enough into the race with just over 10 minutes remaining that there's not going to be an awful lot of opportunity for Stuart Mosley to recover that. You can drive around a stop and go penalty if it's early in the race, but now for Stuart, by the time it's all done, he's going to have lost about 20-25 seconds. And that is going to make it touch and go whether or not he and Ricardo are going to be on the Supersport rostrum.
Yeah, it's worth noting with the pit stops, obviously they have their allocated time they need to stop, but the whole time is measured from the beginning to the end of the pit lane. So it may not be that their stop was short, it may have been that they drove in or left slightly too slow, for example. So the whole time's calculated, so it can just be literally one or 2 seconds that makes all the difference.
Alex Kapadia, our race leader, the car that he inherited from Manhal Alos, is carving through the traffic. That's Mark Hignett, who he puts a lap on. Now he's getting in amongst some of the Supersport front runners, and this is a little bit of a moment of vexation for Kapadia, because when you catch cars to lap them when they're running on their own, that's one thing. If you catch cars to lap them and they're busy racing wheel to wheel, that's quite another.
Yeah, very difficult. Obviously, with the two classes, you've just always got to be aware of that. There's people that can be fighting position as well as being lapped, so it does create a slight challenge. But Alex, very experienced driver, and he knows the grid very well, so he knows exactly who's in which car, and you can make his decisions based on that. And of course, the battle that's happening behind him for second, third, and fourth is only playing into his hands because he's able to keep his lead, and he's putting in some fantastic lap times consistently.
Yeah, he's 13.5 seconds clear of Darren Burke, and we can enjoy it in super slow motion. Alex just navigating Vale, just looks so smooth, letting the car do all the hard work, just doing as little as possible with the steering input. But again, you see there just how rigid the cars are and how much of buffeting he's getting. Now this is significant potentially, as Bradley Smith running wide into Village, and that does it promote James Littlejohn up into third place. Yes, it seems to, so Littlejohn, we'll find out in a moment's time, seems to have got the jump over Bradley Smith in that fight for second and third. Meanwhile, Mark Hignett and Martin Verity do battle. Here comes Darren Burke. He's in second place, and yes, Littlejohn is up to third, and is going to do everything he can to keep Bradley Smith behind him. The key for Bradley is, can he stay close enough to Littlejohn through Beckett's to regain that place along the Hanger Straight and into Stowe.
Yeah, Bradley clearly struggling with the handling of that car, and a big lock-up which gave away that place to James Littlejohn. So just needs to keep as focused as he can and really work on sticking there. But it's very clear to me, I think, from previous races that he is struggling with that car in this race. So they've obviously done something that's just slightly unsettled him.
Now let's have a look. This was them coming down the Wellington Straight, and this is how Littlejohn sealed the deal. Got the inside line for Brooklands, and that was always going to be fairly transactional for James Littlejohn. And yes, he's been able to carry that momentum out of Stowe as well. I think Darren Burke's going to be too much of a task for Littlejohn, but nonetheless for he and Tony Wells, it's another potential podium finish. They're going to concede some points to Alison Kapadia, and as we head towards the second half of the championship season, it's going to be nice and close. Darren Burke picks his way past Martin Verity, can't quite find a way past Mark Hignett as well. And that is the task for Littlejohn in a few moments' time, to find a way around the dueling Supersport runners.
I think it's certainly Wells and Littlejohn, very strong pairing. They've raced together for a number of years, so they'll be happy with this result considering the level of drivers at the front. It's definitely a strong weekend, and there's some fantastic pairings there. So yeah, worked very hard, and let's just see if he can catch up with Darren and give him a little bit of battle at the end.
And with an eye towards the championship, Tony Wells-Jones Little John been very, very effective at banking the points. Oh, and that's a real chop there from Martin Verity. I just don't think he realised that James Littlejohn had been able to draw quite as closely alongside, and nothing malicious in that. It was just a slight misjudgment, but nonetheless, just as Littlejohn was about to make that move, the door that he thought was open was closed pretty emphatically. Bradley Smith, though, not quite close enough to take any sort of advantage from it.
No, yeah, I'm sure there'll be some frustration in the cockpit of Little John's car there, but he said innocent mistake, and fortunately no one came off any harm there.
And it's also part and parcel of endurance racing. It's part and parcel of multi-class racing. You have different cars at different speeds, and everybody's entitled to have their own race.
Yeah, and as said earlier, with the two classes, you know, you can have two cars that one that's coming to be lapped, but you know, both the cars are maybe fighting for position, so it's very difficult, and you've got to be as fair as possible. But yeah, Little John negotiated that situation well and got through.
Just 6 minutes of the race remaining as Alex Kapadia leads the way. Darren Burke in solid second. He is coming back at Alex and is taking a second or so a lap out of him, but that is going to be of absolutely no concern for Alex Kapadia, because he was the driver who was able to build up the buffer immediately post pit stops. And so here is the fight for third. Little John picking his way past Wesley Fongini, and Bradley Smith just biding his time. Now this is going to be tricky for Alex Kapadia. He's got Jim Booth, who is busy doing battle with, I think it's Alex Mortimer. Indeed it is. And Alex fairly easy to deal with. It's going to be a lot harder though for Kapadia to find a way past Jim Booth. He's going to have to do that through the twisty bits rather than rely on straight line speed, and it's one of those things, as you start to lap deeper and deeper into the field, it gets harder and harder to lap your rivals. Oh, and now more drama from the steward's office. We've got a drive-through penalty for James Littlejohn for track limits.
Yeah, I mean, just as we were saying, great sort of race for them, that comes up, so that's really going to be hard for them to swallow.
And that's most unlike James as well to get in trouble for a track limits violation. We'd certainly not seen anything in the pictures that we'd had available to us, but it means that Bradley Smith is looking pretty good for the third place on the rostrum, depending on what point Littlejohn decides to serve that penalty. And it's always one of the really tough things. I quite like that penalties are given in race, because it means that you're not waiting around for hours to find out actually who finished where. At the same time, if you dispute it, then you've got to take your medicine, and there's no real redress if you can prove you're in the right.
No, yeah, very frustrating. These guys are very passionate about racing, and when penalties like this come up and they may think they're hard done by, they obviously can appeal after the race. But yeah, it's very frustrating to have to wait for results. So, you know, really, if they do get served in the race and the results we know by the end, it's much better for spectators and all involved. And just seeing there, Kapadia trying to get past Jim Booth, who's making his car very wide down there.
Yeah, there is a famous instance. It was a meeting in which radicals were competing, not a radical driver, I hasten to add, who was given an in-race penalty and was so angry that he came into the pits, stormed out of his racing car, was in his road car and on his way home before the checker flag had come out. And
yeah, I think that shows the passion that some of these drivers have, and just how involved and into their racing they get. Obviously Kapadia past Jim Booth now, and plenty of a gap then between Darren, who we can see just in the background.
And that's exactly really what Alex wanted to do, because you just want to get a couple of cars between yourself and Darren Burt. The gap is 10.5 seconds, and Alex Kapadia is about to start his penultimate lap of the race as he accelerates through Woodcote for the final time. It's been a really solid weekend from Al Hals and Alex Kapadia. The next target for Alex is Yanni Herpia, and Yanni is currently third in the Supersport class, but not unsurprisingly, Stuart Mosley, the Supersport class leader, he's got a stop and go penalty to deal with, and he is leaving it as late as possible. There is also the option available of do you protest the penalty and then take your medicine afterwards if you're found to be in the wrong, but then you don't have to serve the penalty on the track. But
Yeah, no, we have seen that a couple of times this year, drivers waiting and protesting, and yep, some of them do sort of take the argument if they feel they've got a good case, but more often than not, I would say the decision is made on track and the penalty is served. So,
and also most drivers know in their hearts of hearts if they've actually transgressed or not, and sometimes you have to go, well, yeah.
Yeah, and the stewards, they're just making decisions based on safety and fairness, and it's difficult because they just want to see everyone race and finish and not have penalties. But at the same time, we're running a championship, and in the interest of keeping everyone safe and fairness across the field, sometimes they do have to enforce these penalties.
Well, Stuart Mosley has now served his stop-and-go penalty, and that promotes Marco Ciancetti to the lead of the Supersport class. And well, the one time I picked up a penalty in my inglorious racing career, I jumped the start in a race in France by about 17 seconds. And when they kept hanging out the board to me saying, "You've got a time penalty." I was like, I know, I was half a lap ahead of the field by the first corner. You don't need to tell me. And there wasn't a point of argument in that one.
No.
There have been times also you expect to see some sort of warning flag coming out if you're in the middle of a really, really frantic dice, as Capardia heads around Luffield and is into Woodcote. He's about to start the final lap of the race, and he flashes through. And this is when it starts to get all a little bit anxious. Malhaus on the pit wall. He'll be waiting to hear the car coming back through, and of course, because Silverstone, relatively speaking, is such a flat circuit, there's no opportunity unless you've got the pictures coming through into the pits to actually see what's going on the far side of the circuit. You just got to wait and listen.
Yeah, it's very difficult from the pit wall. You're relying on radio and time communication, so it's always a little bit nerve-wracking that last lap, just making sure that everything comes home and that the driver's fine. So just wondering whether James Littlejohn has popped into the pits or not.
Yes, he has.
He's served that penalty. So
he serves the drive-through penalty, and that promotes Bradley Smith up into third. There he is as Jim Booth looks to repass Darren Burke on the way into Stowe. Darren having absolutely none of that, brakes as late as possible.
Yeah, great driving from Jim. He's very keen, and he absolutely loves that Spider car, and you can just see him there getting really involved, just enjoying the racing and giving everyone a good run for their money.
Well, of course, he was on the podium outright yesterday evening, which was a wonderful result to see, and I think he would, not surprisingly, be very, very happy with it, as through Abbey and then around Farm and on the brakes into Village and the Loop.
Yeah, fantastic driver from Alex, just bringing the car home, very smooth.
Absolutely everything that he needed to do. So he is going to score another victory in the 2016 campaign for himself and Malhaus. But this is exactly the way they'd have wanted the race to unfold. Just really smooth, straightforward performance. Oh, that's a shame. Jim Booth in trouble. Curse of the commentator.
Such a shame, yeah. Hopefully he can get that car going so he can finish off the lap. That'd be such a shame if he can't bring it home.
Well, somebody who is bringing it home is Alex Capardia. He accelerates through Woodcote for the final time to score victory in the third and final race of the Radical European Masters weekend here at Silverstone. So it's victory for Malhaus and Alex Capardia. Second place to Darren Burke and Chris Hyman, and Bradley Smith completes the podium in third. So a very nice race again from the Radical European Masters, and particularly for Alex Capardia and Malhaus. It sets us up very nicely for the remainder of the championship. So of course we're into Donington Park, we're then on to Monza, and then the season finishes in Jerez at the end of October. Well, let's take a look back at the very best of the race then, with Bradley Smith leading into Copse Corner for the first time. And amazingly, they all made it through cleanly despite plenty of frantic dicing a little bit lower down the order. One of the real stories was the progress of Mike Cantillon in the Spider. He was scything his way up through the pack. Also going well was Andrew Ferguson as he picked his way past Tony Wells. But Cantillon charging through the field, and unfortunately for him, he pitted out of sequence in the mid-race pit stops, and that took away his chances of a podium finish. Malhaus was able to overhaul Bradley Smith in the early running, and then post pit stops, Cantillon was busy doggedly defending second. He knew he'd have to pit in. He lost out first of all to Darren Burt, then to Bradley Smith, as Bradley and Darren did battle, but Darren held his nerve around the outside at Luffield. That was enough to consolidate second place for him and Chris Hyman. James Littlejohn did battle with Bradley Smith as well. He was able to get third on the road, but he picked up a drive-through penalty for track limits. So it was victory for Alex Kapadia and Manhal. They were triumphant from Chris Hyman and Darren Burke, with Bradley Smith completing the podium. Marcello Maracciotto and Marco Ciancetti winning the Supersport class from Ricardo Dona and Stuart Mosley, with then Yanni Herpia completing the podium. So we'll have a check of the final classification then. So Allos and Kapadia winning it from Hyman and Burke, then Bradley Smith, Wells and Littlejohn in fourth, from Mike Cantillon in fifth, Andrew Ferguson in sixth, Maracciotto and Ciancetti win the Supersport class in seventh from Dona and Mosley, then Yanni Herpia, Mark Crader and Alex Mortimer in 10th from Jim Booth, who did get up to speed again, Martin Verity in 12th from Hignett and Hancock, the Bin Ladens in 14th, despite them having to take an unscheduled drive-through penalty. Unfortunately, we lost Alan Costa and Johan Shear early on, and also James Winslow. We didn't see him returning to the pits, but unfortunately he did when he took over from John Corbett. So into the pit lane, and success in the Radical European Masters for Alex Kapadia and Manhal Allos. So thank you very much for joining us at Silverstone this weekend, and from Josh Duran and Ben Evans, it's goodbye, and we'll see you later in the season as the Radical European Masters reaches its conclusion.